5th, 2023 at the Freiburg New Church Assembly. And my talk today is on being lost in the wilderness, how waiting transforms us. And I'd like to read a passage from Exodus 14. This is after Pharaoh has let the Israelites go, and then the Lord hardened his heart and he came after them. And this starts with verse 10. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were in great fear. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be still. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading, the hearing, the understanding, and the living of his holy word. He asked them to be still. Now, I went through many parts of the Bible to look for other places where we are asked to be still. And in Psalm 130, I wait for the Lord, my soul doth wait, and in his word do I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. I say, more than they that watch for the morning. And from Proverbs 8, Blessed is the one who hears me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the post of my doors. And from Psalm 27, Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And from Psalm 46, Be still and know that I am God. I chose to speak about waiting in the wilderness as a very important part of our spiritual journey, which, as we heard in lectures previously, is not just a one-time event in adolescence. We go into wilderness periods many times during our lives, and I feel like I'm in one now, as I've retired from my church work and am waiting to find out what it is. What is this place of possibility? It is a place that is confusing, just as the period of the Israelites living and leaving Egypt to go into the desert. And boy, didn't they complain about it. Do we complain about it when we are lost in the desert? Yes. Yes, we always do. Our natural self complains about not having direction, not knowing what we're supposed to be doing. This is how I feel right now. It's very confusing, and it's a time of waiting because I don't know. Now, Swedenborg gives us an insight into why they had to wait in the desert for 40 years. In the Arcana 2280, it says, Everyone who was over 20 years old died in the wilderness because they could be held responsible for their evil. So those who came out of Egypt, which is the land of learning, came into the desert, that older generation had to die. As Allison said in her lecture, there had to be a release of those old feelings, that the idea that they were better off as slaves, the idea that, well, why do they have to die in the desert? They could have died comfortably home in their beds. But they were in Egypt for a purpose and a time period. It was a period of learning. And first, they were guests. Joseph was there, and they were saved from the famine. But over time, when Joseph died, they became slaves to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh represents control in the natural. So they didn't want to leave where they were at least somewhat fed and sheltered, but they wanted to be free. There's conflicting dynamics at this point in the story. I feel like that too. Any of us who have gone through transitions when there was a period of time when you didn't know what was happening next. Typically, adolescence is that period, and that's Swedenborg writes a lot about the trials in the desert. But they also had many blessings. Moses struck the rock and they had water. They had manna from heaven. So what was so wrong about having to live in the desert? They had to wait. They had to wait and be still. The elders, who were the ones who, in Swedenborg says, were responsible for their actions, maintained a slave mentality. They were slave to the learning that they received in Egypt. They had an overweening sense of the importance of the learning, of the education, of the knowledge, and that needed to die off. So that the younger people who grew up in the wilderness, who were raised in freedom, were taught the covenants of the religion, and then they became excited to reach out and grow, to become Joshua heading into the Holy Land. But this is what really caught me. AC 2708. Resided in the wilderness symbolizes what is relatively dim. This can be seen from the symbolism of residing as living, and from that of the wilderness as something barely alive, something dim, but only relatively so. Relatively dim refers to the condition of a spiritual religion compared to that of a heavenly religion, or the condition of spiritual people compared to that of heavenly people. Heavenly people are drawn to goodness, spiritual people to truth. Heavenly people have perception, but spiritual people have the voice of conscience. Heavenly people see the Lord as the sun, but spiritual people as the moon. Just as the former receive light to see by the Lord, they also receive light to perceive goodness and truth by, and this light resembles the sunlight of day. The latter receive a light from him that resembles moonlight at night, so things are relatively dim for them. The reason for the difference is that heavenly people dwell in love for the Lord, and so in life itself from him, while spiritual people dwell in charity for their neighbor and in faith. They do dwell in the Lord's life, but then more dimly. That is why those who are heavenly never debate about religion or spiritual truth. Goodness gives them an intuition for truth, so they simply say yes. The spiritual, though, talk and argue about religious truth because truth gives them a conscience for goodness. Another reason is that the heavenly people have a loving goodness planted in the voluntary part of their mind or their will, where a person's main life resides. Spiritual people have it planted in the intellectual part of their mind, where a person's secondary life resides. This explains why that loving goodness is relatively dim in spiritual people. I'm feeling relatively dim. Although I aspire to being heavenly and have my will guide my actions and follow the life of good and truth and be useful, I'm still stuck in the talking and arguing about religious truth. It gives you a conscience for goodness, so it's not a bad thing, but it's not, we haven't followed the path all the way. And this is where we need to wait for the Lord. The Lord brings us deeply into the heavenly goodness, where we don't argue about religious truth. When we heard the passage from Jeremiah, we will not be going around saying, this is the truth. No, this is the Lord, because each one will know it in our hearts. So our path goes from the natural, where they were in Egypt and learning much information, out into the wilderness. And through the wilderness, to get to the wilderness, they had to go through the Red Sea. They had to be cleansed. They had to release the slave mentality and the belief that Pharaoh had control over them, to go to the desert where they could wait and feel the Lord's control, the Lord's influx that inspires us to do more and more of the spiritual, which is loving the neighbor and having a conscience, but more into the actual living every day of that truth, perhaps without even really thinking about it. There's a sequence that I learned about in seminary, which I really love, and I'm going to use the physical experience of riding a bicycle to demonstrate it. First, we have unconscious incompetence. Then we have conscious incompetence. Then we have conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. And the way it works with a bicycle is the first thing you see a bicycle, say, oh, that would be fun. I'd like to ride that. You don't know how. You're unconscious that you're incompetent. Then you get on and you try to ride and you fall off. Well, now you're conscious of your incompetence because you know you didn't do that right. Then after practice and help with someone holding the seat, I like to think of the Lord holding the seat of the bicycle, that you become consciously competent to ride a bike. And then the last stage is someone says, we need bread, go to the store. You get on the bike and you go. You don't even think about it anymore. And that's the stage that we're talking about, the heavenly, celestial life, is being unconsciously competent that we can do what needs to happen. We can handle what's in front of us. We have confidence in ourselves that the Lord is still there holding the seat if we need it. So this is the transition from a spiritual heaven to a celestial heaven, going from understanding truth to living truth. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about my own path. And one of the things that I've told this story to a couple of people already about, learning what truths are real in the world takes experience. I learned that it's important for every voice to be heard. When I was 16, I was in France. I was at an archaeological dig. A truck was backing over this really thin dirt bridge over a moat. I was on the outside. Everyone else was on the other side. No one else could see that the truck wheels were going over the edge. I knew the word for stop was arrête. I could not say it. I somehow did not feel that my voice would make a difference. That truck fell into the moat. They went and got a tow truck. That tow truck fell into the moat. They had to get a crane to finally get these two trucks out of the moat. If I had just said that one word, it would have made such a difference. So I understand now the importance of speaking the truth that you see. Another thing that I feel is a heavenly experience is feeling the joy of community. And I learned that in being part of a group of college friends, group that we ran the Natural Foods Co-op in Portland together, lived on a commune not far from here, and being part of church. These are all community experiences where I have learned how important it is to have others that we can talk to about our journey, that we can ask questions of, we can argue about things. We need each other. We are herd animals. And finally, in my work in hospice as a chaplain, I've learned the power of presence, that simply being there, and this is something I used to tell all of the volunteers because sometimes they would feel very useless sitting at a bedside or sitting with a family, and especially if someone's unconscious. And I'd say, your being here is a power, and it's the power of showing that you are not afraid of death. Families need to feel that from other people, and certainly nurses do that and aides do that, but particularly when someone is a spiritual person, to have a chaplain with them modeling that this is not something I'm going to run away from. I will be here with you for this. And so that's the power, these important things about voice and community and presence, they have helped me to see, maybe not get to the celestial, but see what it is and where it is. And how do you get there? Well, you have to wait. You have to wait. You have to wait until that opportunity arises for you. You have to wait till the Lord puts you in a situation where you can do what you need to do, either speak up or participate or simply be. Waiting leads to openness and growth. The openness to have an intuitive wisdom of the situation and what needs to happen. And in that waiting, we are with the Lord, and the Lord's inspiration in the moments that comes to us is the relief of knowing that we are traveling the path from the natural to the spiritual to the celestial. From TCR 105, the divine design is that we arrange ourselves for receiving God and prepare ourselves as a vessel and a dwelling place where God can enter and live as if it were his own temple. We have to do this preparation by ourselves, yet we have to acknowledge that the preparation comes from God. This acknowledgement is needed because we do not feel the presence or the actions of God, even though God is in fact intimately present and brings about every good love and every true belief we have. This is the divine design we follow and have to follow to go from being earthly to being spiritual to being celestial. Now I want to just point out the celestial is that day 7, which we said nobody ever gets to, but it's the direction we're heading. More important than arriving is to have the direction we're heading be one of receiving God and knowing that God is living in us. The waiting, which I want to say is being still, perhaps meditating, perhaps simply looking at the beauties of nature, or going about your daily life, just doing what's in front of you to do. The waiting is the time for the preparation for God to be able to be received in our hearts and minds. I mentioned this in the discussion group yesterday, but Swedenborg writes that there's very few ministers in heaven because they really were quite sure they knew what was going on and didn't listen to the angels at all when they arrived. So we need to be humble in our waiting and know that in waiting we will find where we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do, what good can come into the world because of that. And I want to tell you an experience I had just before we moved to Temenos to Pennsylvania. We lived in Maine, and my next door neighbor was dying of pancreatic cancer. And those of you who know about that disease know it goes very quickly. And her husband came over and asked me if I would come talk to her. She was at home because she was very afraid she was going to hell because she hadn't been to Mass. This is a Catholic woman. And she had those teachings. That was the teachings that were in her. So when I went over, I really didn't know what to say. And so I just sat with her and I held her hand and I asked, if she wanted to talk about that. So she told me her fears. And when I waited a little longer, what came to me was kind of to help her reflect on her life. Because she had been she worked in the kitchen at the high school. She rescued dogs, and she had a family, two boys. And I said, well, Terry, you were always so loving to all those kids at the school. I said, did you feel love in that? She said, yes, I did. I felt I loved those kids. And how about all those dogs you rescued? And she said, yeah, I love those dogs. And then I said, well, how about your family? How's that experience been? She said, oh, I love my family. And then I said, well, what do you think God is? She said, well, God is love. I said, well, I think you've already been to church in your life. You've satisfied the loving the neighbor and loving creatures. And she really she resonated with that it was her life and her love in her life was real. The teaching that you're going to go to hell if you don't go to Mass, that's just words. But her life was lived with love. And I felt so good that the Lord gave me those words to share with her, to say, and I wasn't giving her anything profound. I was just reminding her of the love that she had lived. So there's a lot of ways that we are inspired to speak by the Lord's waiting for God to inspire us. One of the, kind of a foolish thing, but I always used to have a lot of lists of things that I had to do. At one point in my life, it was a single-spaced full page of all the things I had to do. And it was incredibly stressful. And it came to me that I think I'll just wait for the Lord to tell me which thing to do. And so I would still make a list to put things down so I wouldn't forget what they were. But I wouldn't prioritize and figure out when to do things. I would wait till the Lord's impetus in me said, oh, this be a good day to do this. And that's how I would use the list as a basis from which the Lord would pick and choose which things I needed to do and when I needed to do them. The waiting for God to participate in our way that we are living our lives is an important thing. And I want to say I've seen it in so many ways, in interactions with human beings, in knowing when to speak and when to listen, knowing when is the right now. We have this concept that we talk about when I ask Dean to do something. He say, well, no, it's the wrong now. There's the right now and the wrong now. And when you can allow that you need some help, but maybe the other person doesn't want to do it yet, you can allow that we can wait. We could wait until it's the right now. The other thing I wanted to lift up about waiting is the difference between seeing and hearing and looking and listening. We go about our day, we see many things, we hear many things. They come at us. But when we wait and we look and we listen, we hear more, we see more, we go deeper than when we simply trudge along on our day and, yeah, I see oh, it's nice out there, sure, I got to get here. And I don't know how many of you feel the draw to keep going, no matter where you are in your day. Oh, I got to do the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing. What about adding waiting in between those things? Waiting to let the Lord speak to you. Waiting with an openness to that it could be anything. You have no idea how the Lord is going to speak to you next. You really don't. None of us do. But when you hear it, when you feel it, when you're there, listen and respond. That's the piece of the waiting, is when you do hear what's next, let that be your next action. And do it with the knowledge that the Lord is doing it through you. Next week I'm going to be talking about truth. I know a lot of you won't be here, but that's the big truth, is the Lord is doing the work. The Lord is saving us. The Lord is asking us to be still and let him get on with his job. Don't try to always do something. Don't do something, stand there. This waiting is very pregnant with possibility. And I can get impatient with waiting. Isn't it time to do this? I really should do something over here. I'm needed over here. Now, having claimed myself as retired, I feel like that's learning how to not do something all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He'll testify. I am not good at this. Don't do something all the time. Sit and listen. Be still and know that I am God. God tells us so many times in the Proverbs and in the Psalms to be still, to wait, to slow down. And I want to just speak to an experience that I had as a hospice chaplain. Many times with older women especially, they would ask, why am I here? I'm not doing anything anymore. And I would always ask them about their families. And most people had children and grandchildren or other family members. And I would just try to point out to them, you love them, right? Yeah, they love their family. What's it going to feel like for them if you give up? What's it going to feel like to them if you don't want to love them anymore? And they're like, no, that's not what I mean. But they're so used to always doing to show their love that the concept of simply loving, and for some it's write them a card or call them on the phone, some way to show that you love people. That love is necessary in the world. That love is important. And to simply feel that you're not of value because you're not doing something is discounting the love that you are sharing in the world for other people. And the love that comes back to you from that is the love that keeps you going. I mean, we know that love is, in many cases, a mutual, reciprocal relationship. And to give up, I mean, I'm sorry, I think I shamed them into living. You know, don't give up. There are people who love you and depend on you loving them. And if you're not doing that anymore, and you're giving up and saying, I'm not useful anymore, you're missing the point that love is the primary relationship that we have in the world. Loving what we do, loving people, loving the Lord. It's all about love. Usefulness is great when you can still do it. When you can't, your love is useful. Your love is what connects you to the world that you're living in. So I'd like to just end with a passage in Scripture from Isaiah, and then we'll open up the floor. And it shall be said in that day, Lo, this is our God. We have waited for God, and God will save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. We will be glad and rejoice in his salvation. Amen. So we open it up for the floor. Lee has the microphone. Oh, look for the fleur-de-lis. That was a good translation.
This is Dean. Susannah, if you're a minister, where are you going to go after you die?
Where am I going to go after I die?
Yeah, I thought we were going to be together.
I'll look for you, I promise.
I just love that, and one thing that helps me remember that love is the most primary thing is my new nephew, Dylan, and after spending time with him, it was so nice to go back to my own kids and remember them as newborns and how easy that love was, and that's still primarily who they are. It's still primarily who all of us are, is that newborn life that doesn't need to do anything but just be.
Okay, don't fight. No fight.
And please state your name.
Hi, this is Kevin.
Hey, Kev.
We just coming off of Almont, where we talked about the tabernacle a little bit, and we didn't quite get to the wandering. One of the things that I was kind of thinking about in this concept of wandering, especially the story of the people of Israel through Swedenborg being the discussion of the representative church, which is trying to understand the rules that we're supposed to live by in the midst of waiting, and what's the role of temptation for you in waiting? Because the people of Israel, through that waiting, the experience is temptation after temptation after temptation. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I'm going to go backwards a little to say they got what they needed. They got the manna from heaven. They got the water from the rock. And the temptations are all from the thinking from Egypt about this knowledge I have, and I want to use it, and why can't I do this, and why can't I do that? Well, they weren't in the promised land yet. So I think that's a good way of thinking of the wandering, is they didn't know which way to go. I mean, they wandered around. They didn't know. The knowledge from Egypt did not tell them, other than the promised land, it didn't tell them where to go in the wilderness. They went all over the place. And the temptations come from the knowledge and the thinking that we're doing, whereas I'm trying to bring us down to the waiting is where it's clear what to do next. You know, we talked about the relatively dim spiritual reality in the desert is the not knowing and being upset about that, wanting to know. They wanted to understand, and that wasn't the point of the waiting. The waiting was to allow the time for that spiritual, the slave mentality to die off, and the new generation to come forth with a sense of, whoa, we have this promised land to get to. Now that's kind of an exciting journey. When are we going to go there? They also still had a hard time waiting until it was time to go. But I think that the temptations are the remnant of the Egyptian time. And the older folks who, as Swedenborg says, are responsible for their evils. The younger ones were not so much so. I don't know if that answers your question, but okay. Gard?
Sure. Thank you, Susannah. I really got a lot out of your talk about the waiting. It's such a beautiful message to wait.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So just a couple comments. One is there's so much love that came through your talk. I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt it. All your examples were about love and waiting for love. So I have one example and then one idea. When you talked about being with your neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
and she was really kind of hurting,
Mm-hmm.
you came up with just the right thing for her.
The Lord did.
Well,
It came through me.
well, okay, that's another conversation. We are, you are very clear that we are preparing ourselves. You had prepared yourself. That's our responsibility, to satisfy the conditions that are required for the Lord to be present.
Yes.
Waiting is a condition, and we do it. So I'm honoring the human process. So the comment I want to make about that is just a habit I think Swedenborgians have to say. The seventh day, of course, is one we never get to. Or we're not going to get there, but that's our destination. I really want to kind of learn how not to say that, if I don't mind saying it that way. You were in the seventh day when you were sitting with that woman. You really were. And you're in the seventh day when you're speaking to us. It's a state of mind inside us. I'm trying to say that I believe it is a state of mind for which a mature person like yourself and some of ourselves can do it in those moments. We're in the seventh day. And it's not something we have to wait for forever. That's promissory developmentalism. It's a great thing and you'll never get to it. Not a good message. Okay, so I'm sorry to say it that way, but I love you so much. And it was such a good message. And thank you for being in the seventh day with our conversation today.
Yeah. We all get glimpses, that's for sure.
Hi, this is Martha. I noticed that they go through the Red Sea and are cleansed. But then all, I don't know, difficulties, I want to say hell, arises. Is that cleansing kind of like the beginning of regeneration, kind of like they're realizing that they want something more in their lives, but because you think, oh, I've been cleansed, you know, I'm saved now, and but that's kind of like the very beginning.
Repent, reform,
Yep.
repeat.
Yep.
Because it's going to come back. It's not just the wilderness period in adolescence.
Oh.
It's the wilderness period because I've just retired. It could be a wilderness period because a relationship has ended, or wilderness period because you're grieving. I mean, there's many, many transitions in life where we are back in the wilderness again, and we need to work with that and wait.
Yeah, my first thought when you said they went through the Red Sea and was cleansed, and I said, yeah, but.
Yeah, but then they said,